Okay, gang, this is the excitement of a filibuster in the House of Commons. Right there, that is a live look at a green slate as they await the results of electronic voting because the House of Commons right now, MPs, they have now passed the 24th straight hour of voting. So, does sleep deprivation speed up or slow down your pulse? Well, we're going to check the political pulse of Ottawa this week with our panel of political insiders who will not be covered by a green slate on the screen. Greg MacEachern, former Liberal ministerial staffer, now with Can Strategies. Melanie Richer, former Director of Communications in the New Democratic Party, now a senior consultant with Earnscliffe Strategies. And Fred DeLorey, former Conservative campaign manager and partner at North Star Public Affairs. You know, Greg, when we planned this segment of shows, it's, do a live look at the House of Commons. We'll show the tired MPs, and, you know, that's how you know it's live, folks. So let's talk about this, because you all kind of raise this as as the big moment of the week, or at least it fits into a larger narrative of the week. But, Greg, you don't think this is a good move by the Conservatives necessarily to do this kind of filibuster. What's your take on it?
No, I mean, for a party that talks a lot about common sense, this doesn't feel like it has any sense, common or otherwise. It's wasting a lot of money and time. And there's it's hard to find the connection to what they're talking about. They're talking about this is about carbon pricing when none of the votes are about carbon pricing. And let's keep in mind, majority of the parties of the House of Commons want some sort of form of carbon pricing, and the Conservatives themselves ran on this in the last election in 21. They had some sort of plan themselves. Now they don't. What it reminds me of, I was going to say, in terms of Mr. Poliver, he took off. He wasn't there for his own filibuster. And I was going to say it's like having a party and you don't show up. But I'm like, it doesn't feel like a party. It reminds me of those 80s movies where somebody tells one gang or one football team, we're going to go beat up on the other ones. And the guy who stirs it all up takes off and heads out. And he goes to Montreal.
That was me in high school, by the way.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah. The problem as well is he went to a fundraiser, and he also prevented, I'm glad that he went to a Hanukkah event. It's been a really terrible fall in terms of for the Israeli people, for Jewish people, but he also prevented other Jewish MPs who were stuck in the House of Commons from attending their events. And other Conservative MPs got to go to Hanukkah events, but the rest of them, especially if you're in the government, you didn't get to go. That won't go unnoticed.
Yeah, it was a confidence vote, so they had to be there, and even with remote voting, you don't want to rely on it in a confidence and go too far afield from the House of Commons in case you need to get back there.
It feels petty, it feels mean.
Mel, what's your take on this one?
Yeah, I guess there's like mixed takes a little bit. We're talking about Pierre Poilievre, I think, all week this week for different reasons. So I guess if that's the goal of being in the news, I think goal accomplished. I think voting on issue by issue against, and I know they're voting against it to make a point, they're trying to draw the clock out, but all of these things that they're voting against, MPs are then going to be able to go back to the ridings and say, this is what the Conservatives voted against. They voted against, you care about this issue, they voted against it. You care about this issue, you voted against it. And even issues that are typically in the Conservative wheelhouse, like either military spending or CSIS spending, also voted against. They keep voting against it. I think it's just going to give ammunition to MPs to go back to their ridings, especially MPs who are up against the blue team in the next election, to say, you care about this issue? Well, here's the proof of them voting against it. So I think on that front, it's a little bit less strategic.
Fred, do you see it that way?
I've been around Ottawa for 2 decades now, and a historian of politics, and looking at all this, I can never think of a time where the official opposition ever voted for a governing budget. It just doesn't happen. So you can point out these things, but the opposition never supports the government budget,
nope.
So I don't see this at all. And I see on the opposite, where Poilievre has one clear message he's been hammering this week is the carbon tax, and we've seen he's been getting great coverage on that. He's been pushing that message. His team is unified on that. You can see them constantly coming out talking about that. And if we have the other parties, they're the governing parties basically supporting the Liberals' budget, who are out there saying, they're going to go back to the ridings with a laundry list of all of these different things. It's hard to communicate. So I think on that front, this is a win for Poilievre. Right.
I mean, Greg, Fred has a point there that two things clearly unify the Conservatives: opposition to the carbon tax and 1 a.m. McDonald's deliveries from their leader. Because that video, that's the happiest I've seen them look in a long time.
Yeah. I'd say there's also a play of the week here. I've heard an MP say Pierre Poilievre has brought the Liberal caucus together in a way they couldn't bring themselves together. Morale is extremely high. It might be the worst Christmas party on record, but they're all there, and they're in, from what I hear, in a very, very good mood. And I dispute what Fred said. The Ukrainian-Canadian Congress today came out against the vote. And it's a bit different, Fred. It's not just a vote on the budget. They have done this so that they have to, do about a vote every 15 minutes on every issue. And some of these amendments, they could have said, yeah, we support Ukraine, but they're not. And I think that's a bit problematic. It feels a little bit like the Republicans more and more. I know no one likes to hear that because we don't want to hear about that creep, but it's harder and harder to avoid that connection.
Right. So Fred, I just want to get to that bit before I go to Mel for a pick, because Paul Wells raised this issue earlier. This is not about the Ukrainian Free Trade Agreement today. They voted against Operation Unifier, which is the Canadian mission to train Ukrainian soldiers, which has been widely credited to help them hold on this long. I take your point. Opposition parties vote against budgets. Right. But when you break it out line by line and it's that line, is that a potential problem for them? Because it's already out on the clips.
It is, and again, when you go with the laundry list, and that's where if the governing parties had an actual narrative, they can push and focus on these and tell that story. And this is a problematic point, voting against this. And the reason is, it's obviously the carbon tax is a message the Conservatives are winning on, and they're pushing it out. But I think we all know the Ukraine vote has nothing to do with the carbon tax. It's about playing politics here locally and going after their own base. That the new Conservative base, which happens to not support funding these foreign skirmishes.
Right, which is going to be an interesting challenge as they try to build a coalition. Okay, Mel, you wanted your moment to highlight. What do you got for us this week? Yeah,
so we saw a few things this week. All the votes in the House with Poilievre forcing all those votes. We saw finally a resolution at the Natural Resources Committee where the Sustainable Jobs Act was able to pass after I think it's something like 20,000 amendments from the Conservatives. Went to 2:30 in the morning. Yes, and they've been filibustering for weeks, months, etc. We also saw the Conservatives vote against school. I'm having a hard time with my words today. School food program for kids, and I get that opposition doesn't always want to support the government. But if I'm just a regular person watching these things at home, I can't help but think, why do you hate action on all of these things? Why are you so focused on partisanship that you're against all these things? And I know it's politics. I know we're going to, vote against the things that the government's putting forward, especially when you're trying to be the government in waiting. But for folks who aren't maybe paying attention to the baseball, I think what this looks like is it's childish. It looks like a game. It looks like you're not actually in Ottawa working to get stuff done for me. And I don't think that that's a good message to send to people. Fred, it seems some of what's going on is part of this larger dysfunction, and I'm not blaming this across the country, or defiance across the country, where provinces are saying, we're not going to abide by your legislation, Justin Trudeau, because we don't like it. And now, the Conservatives are gumming up the machinery of Parliament Hill. There is a real Conservative pushback that's just affecting the basic machinery of government operations. Right. Well, filibusters have not just been invented this year. They've been around for a while. Yep. But there's no question the opposition doesn't have a lot of tools to use, so they're using the ones they have. But there's no question there's a lot of anger in this country against the current government, and that it is stronger in the Conservative movement. And the provinces you mentioned are Conservative-governed provinces. Yep. Greg, how do you see this one in terms of hyper-partisanship seeping into everything right now?
What I find interesting is, it's the polling and the polling coverage have been relentless. And yet, despite how well the Conservatives are doing in the polls, they feel that they're still nervous about Max Bernier. Fred mentioned the base, that they still need to appeal to them somehow by not supporting Ukraine. There's been some talk about the MP behavior. There was the MP this week who called the Prime Minister a liar and got kicked out and instantly had something on social media. And there was the finance, they call them shadow ministers, who had the finance minister at a panel asked Minister Freeland if she had seen his leader's brilliant video and encouraged her to watch it and like, share, and subscribe. And I thought to myself, this is a grown man doing this. I would be embarrassed. And why? Are you auditioning for cabinet? That's what I, kind of assumed. But then I did some reading of an interview that Pierre Poilievre did with the National Post columnist Sabrina Maddow, I think in the fall of 22. And he alluded that not everyone's nomination was safe. and that some of these people may be also concerned, and maybe Fred knows more than I do on this, but I've not seen, like we've seen with some of the other MPs, that their nomination is secure. They know that they're running in the next election. So is the leader also using these great polling numbers to kind of dangle that as a sort of Damocles over their head and say, you know, like, let's suck up a little bit more here?
Well, it certainly has an effect of keeping caucus on their toes, right? But, you know, Fred, to get to your pick, I mean, Pierre Poilievre is at the center of almost everything we talk about, right?
Yeah.
He is, whether you like him or dislike him, he is fueling the narrative of Canadian politics more and more and more.
Yeah, the leader of the opposition is setting the agenda in this country politically, which is unheard of. I don't recall ever seeing this before. He's driving the message. They're controlling the House right now. We're complaining about MPs working too hard when they have a month and a half coming up break.
I don't think that's right.
I don't know that's fair. I don't like, seeing, senior citizens. We want all age ranges in the House. I don't really like seeing senior citizens sit there for 24 hours, Fred, but that's just me.
It wasn't the Conservatives that made these a confidence motion where they had to show up.
Oh, I think this. So it's not.
Well, but it's a money bill, so it has to be a confidence motion, right? So but
yeah, you were giving the leader credit.
But we got about 3 minutes left. But just to finish your point, and like he's been able to do this through a variety of ways.
The video he put out last weekend, Housing Hell, millions upon millions of views, and driving that message again. And the Liberals' response to it, Chrystia Freeland put out a tweet with a link to the text of something that's in the Fez talking about it. And it's like there's only one party, I've been saying this for a while now, there's only one party campaigning right now. This is politics, not power and feelings, power and politics. And Poilievre is running circles around the other parties right now.
Fred keeps bringing up the fall economic
I know,
he can't
there
stop
it is
talking
again.
about the Fez. After saying we wouldn't be talking about it, there's a Fez reference every time. But Mel, he is right though, right? People have talked about the permanent campaign as a stable feature now of modern politics, and Pierre Poilievre has certainly embraced that concept. So your party, Greg's party, what do they have to do to start pushing back on this? We've seen Sean Fraser do some things on housing, rhetorically, but certainly not in sort of like the order of magnitude we saw with that video.
Right, and I think another thing that was probably a reason for why there was so much attention is this is, I think, the first time we've seen Poilievre be propositional instead of just angry, mad all the time, right? So this was also an opportunity for folks to start getting a taste of what that would look like as we are actually in an election, whereas so far it's been, just opposition. The world's on fire, let's put everything down. I think, to your point though, he is punching through. And it probably doesn't help that we have the government and we have opposition parties amplifying his video and commenting on it, and all you're doing really is showing more people this video. But what they need to do in the lead up to the next one is they need to take up more space. They need to be focused on their message. And I know there's news of the day that you have to react to all the time, but unless you are focused and persistent on the message, like we've seen Poilievre, they're going to have a hard time punching through.
Yeah, Greg, the government doesn't have the luxury of ignoring issues and focusing on one thing, right? Because you just keep getting sideswiped by the world.
Yeah, and we talked, I think, this 2 Fridays ago about the Liberals had a good week. Last week they had a good week. This week they had a good week. And I think the way that I mentioned that the caucus feels emboldened, I think that's going to have an effect on partisans as well. It's hard with the relentless polling that, it's so negative. But I think this week, and having all those votes, there is an issue there for every Canadian that the Conservatives have voted against.
Right.
Your previous panel talked about a Jewish center. We've talked about the Ukraine, things in Atlantic Canada. There's a lot there for both the Liberals and the NDP to use.
Okay, Greg, sorry, Fred, we got about 15 seconds left. You shook your head when Greg said the Liberals had a good week. You don't think they did? Where do you think they are?
I don't think there's any question Poilievre and the Conservatives won this week. All the headlines they got, positive headlines for them that they were going to make the Liberals work until Christmas, and the video and everything they've done. And of course, we have not talked about Speaker Fergus.
Okay. Right. Yes, and we can't because we're out of time. But they may not even work until Saturday in the House. We'll see. All right. Thank you very much, Fred DeLorey, Melanie Richer, and Greg MacEachern.